Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to be doing one last little bit of practice with GDP. These are actually old AP tests from like 20 years ago. That's how old they are. Oh my gosh. And so we're going to do just a couple of these here. They won't take too long. First, it says indicate whether each of the following is counted in US GDP for the year 2020 and explain. Value of a used textbook bought through an online auction in 2020. So the online auction actually doesn't really matter very much as long as this book was bought in the United States. But the bigger issue is that it's used, right? And so we'd say no, because used aren't market, or we actually maybe should say aren't productive activities. And we're not using that in a judgmental way. You know, there's value in it. It's just that it's not producing something new. We've already counted it. Part B, rent paid in 2020 by residents in an apartment building built in 2015. So this one's a little bit of a red herring as well. The fact that it was built in 2015 doesn't matter. That would matter if we were talking about the building being constructed, but the rent, right, that counts. And it gets counted because, yes, because it's consumption. It's consumption spending. And so we could say that, or because it's rent. Like that's actually the easier way to say it. That rent is one of the four basic categories of the income approach: wages, rent, interest, profit. RIP. Commissions earned in 2020 by a stockbroker. Yes, because it's consumption. Consumption. So like you're consuming their services, or we could say, or because it's wages, right? It's the income that the stockbroker earns. Value of automobiles produced in 2020 entirely in South Korea by a firm fully owned by US citizens. So if the company isn't importing the cars, right, to the United States, then it doesn't matter who owns the company. It gets counted for South Korea. So we'd say no, because international transaction. It's an international transaction and not a net export. If we had like imported it into the United States, then it would count as a subtraction, but it doesn't count. It's not part of the net exports. Part B, identify two methods of calculating GDP. Well, that's pretty easy. We could do the spending, which is C plus I plus G plus XN, or we could do the income approach. Now, your book has a third one called value added. You don't have to worry about it. If you see any questions in your book about value added, ignore them. That is a totally legitimate way of calculating GDP, but for our class, we don't really care about it. Wages, rent, interest, and profit. That's the other one. Explain why the two methods you identified must yield the same value of GDP. Well, that's the circular flow, right? So the circular flow of money. The other way to say this is one person's, this is the common phrase, one man, but I'm say one person's spending is another person's income. Ta-da! So every time somebody spends something, that's income for somebody else. So one person's spending is another person's income. We're going to return to that concept later. It's kind of a pithy phrase, but it actually has quite a bit of meaning for this class. Identify one shortcoming of using GDP as an indicator of the actual level of output. Now, a lot of students would respond to this and say, well, it doesn't count happiness. Okay, that's fair. But that's not actually referring to the actual level of national output, because happiness isn't part of output. But what we could say here is it doesn't count illegal activities. Illegal activities, that's an easy one. It doesn't count non-market activities. So, you know, if you're growing your own food, it doesn't count that. That's output, it's production, but you're growing it yourself, so it doesn't count it. If you know you're growing, I don't know, other things and you're selling those, and you shouldn't be, then that also doesn't count because it's not part of the kind of legal market. So there's lots of parts of our national output that don't get counted, that are separate from that question about like quality of life. And I think that's useful here to observe. If nominal GDP increased by 4% in 2020, identify two additional pieces of information you need before you can conclude the living standard of the typical person increased by 4%. So the easy two, the low-hanging fruit, would be the population change, right? Like how much did the population go up or down, if it changed at all, and you would need to know price level changes. Price level change. Because this is the nominal GDP, we'd need to know at the end of the year, that is a terrible delta. We'd need to know what happened to price levels. So, all right, hopefully this helped you on GDP practice number 3. I'll see you next time.